up, guys? My name is Chris, and this is Tight Lines. Welcome back. Thank you so much for coming back. Hopefully you've watched our first video, the launch of this series called Friday Night Neuro. So that was last week, and every Friday my goal is to produce at least some video on some type of neuroscience topic, and hopefully to share that. It's a passion of mine. Obviously, I'm a PhD student, and I'm in my third year right now. And it's something I really enjoy, and it's something I think is really important, and I just don't think that everybody has a clear picture of what it really means and being able to understand it. And I think one of my things that I love to do, especially whether it's with my students or with other people working in the lab, is I like to try to simplify things and break it down. I think it's great that we know the technical terms, it's great that we understand it, but I think it's also helpful, and it's actually one of our responsibilities to be able to communicate that well to other people. And so that's one of the things that I'm hoping to do with this. I also hope to maybe shed some light on, particular concepts or diseases, anything that you might have questions on. So if you have an idea, something that you're curious about, I want you guys to leave a comment down below. Go to my Twitter, @cupofneuro, or anywhere that you can get in touch with me. Find a way. Let me know. I want to be able to hit the topics that are important to you. If you're a student, maybe, if you're thinking about going into neuroscience, I want to hear from you. If you are a current neuroscientist, maybe you're interested in getting on and doing some video with me, I would love to do that. If you have specific people that you'd like to see on here, let me know. So tonight, one of the things I want to talk about is kind of an expansion of what we talked about last week. So last week I talked about what is neuro and why do people keep adding this neuro term onto things, right? And so you should go back and take a look at that. And I think that's kind of a good starting point. But then the second piece of that is that you have to understand that anytime you're looking at research or you're looking at an article that talks about neuroscience, you need to be very careful about what it's saying. So first thing first, if the article or the topic is not talking about neurons, then it's not really neuroscience, right? So neurons is the foundational type of cell. But you also have to understand that cells can be the same but different, right? So you can have neurons that are different types of neurons. You can have different functions for the neurons depending on where they are, depending on what they do. So you have neurons in your eyes that are very different than the ones that are in your ears, that are very different than the ones that are in your mouth and in your skin, and the ones in your brain and the ones in your spine. These are all types of neurons, but they all do different things, right? So for instance, when we talk about sensation, there's a big difference between sensation and perception, right? So sensation is the actual the receiving of some type of a stimulus. So that means either you can you touch something that's hot or cold. It is in and of itself hot or cold. The sensation is what you're able to receive through the nerves that are in your skin or in your mouth or wherever they may be. But here's the interesting thing, right? So there's different ones for pain versus temperature versus pressure and different types of pressure, right? There's pointed pressure, which becomes almost like a jabbing with something sharp, versus a blunt pressure of something that's not going to necessarily jam through your skin, but you're going to feel pressure like smashing or pushing or pressure in that way. So those are still different types of neurons, and they're different layers of the skin, and they kind of function slightly differently. They are even shaped slightly differently. Same thing with your eyes versus your ears, right? So in your ears you have these little small hair type cilia of sorts that are in your ears. So you have these small hairs that receive in the changes in airwaves, and that's how you sense sound, right? You have taste buds that are in your mouth that respond to specific types of taste. So whether it's sour or sweet or spicy or umami or whatever the case is, your tongue is going to respond to those, but each of those is different. And some might act together, right? So they might function at the same time because of what you're eating has multiple different layers and flavors to it, which is why things that have many different layers of flavor are often the ones that we find the most satisfying, because we can taste them across all of our taste buds. But even those sensations are different than in our eyes, right? In our eyes, we have things called rods and cones, and that's what takes in either light versus darkness, or takes in colors. And so each of these is different. And then all of these different sensations have to be processed somewhere. So those are processed in the brain, where there's other neurons that do that processing. So that has to make its way from wherever the sensation was to the brain to be processed. The other interesting thing is that, it's the same thing that we don't really think about it, right? But when you put your socks on, when you put your clothes on, when you go out the door, when you're walking around, you don't feel your clothes all the time. So even though you are sensing that the clothes are there, you are not processing and perceiving it. So perception is different when it comes to sensation and perception. So you can sense things coming in, but you don't necessarily perceive them. So your brain can process those differently. The other thing to keep in mind is that not only are there different types of cells when it comes to sensation, but even in the processing, right? So in the brain, there's different types of neurons that do things slightly differently, or they could be one neuron that does multiple different things, kind of like a Swiss Army knife. And so you can have certain chemical transmitters that are produced, and that's how signals are sent through the brain, is largely through what are called neurotransmitters. And these are chemicals that are made in the brain, and then they're sent out from one neuron, and another neuron takes it and says, oh, I react to this, and so now I'm going to send a signal based on this. And so there's different types of neurotransmitters. So a neuron could make one or more of these chemical messengers, right? So what you could have is a neuron that is a neuron, but it could be specifically a dopaminergic, so it makes dopamine. It could be GABAergic, which means it makes GABA, or glutamatergic, or serotonergic. Whichever ones of the neurotransmitters, these chemical messengers that it makes and or receives, then it becomes multiple different types, right? So now it can produce multiple neurotransmitters, then that would mean it would be each of those types. And so, yes, there's neurons, but they're very complex in what they do, and depending on where they are and what their function is. Now, keeping in mind, those are not the only types of cells either. So when we talk about the nervous system, it's not just about neurons. So my favorite other cell type, I love neurons, don't get me wrong, but astrocytes are my absolute favorite. I think they're amazingly cool. And the more that we learn about them, we learn that they're actually involved in some of these chemical messenger processes that we didn't really know initially when we first discovered astrocytes in the neuroscience world. But now we know that they are definitely involved in a lot more. They're not just sitting around, and they actually make up at least 50% of the brain, if not more. You also have things called microglia and macroglia, and there's different types of those. There are Schwann cells. You have oligodendrocytes. So you have all of these different types of cells that are all functioning in your nervous system. So it's not as simple and cut and dry to say the nervous system is neurons, right? It's not just that. The nervous system is made up of a whole system of things. And I think that's also super important to understand when trying to understand research that you're reading, understanding anything that you might read in popular literature. Any of these things, you really have to understand that it's not just, one piece. We can study a single piece, but nothing happens naturally in the body by itself with nothing else. And that's where science is really, it's both fascinating and frustrating, because in one hand you're sitting and saying, I found this thing, and on the other hand you're saying, but I don't know what else is happening, and now I have to explore that and figure out what else is going on. So when you read something about pharmacological studies or neurodegeneration or any kind of a neuro-related disease, and treatments and diagnoses and these types of things, that's why it's so difficult, because you can't just study it as one piece. We have to pick it apart and figure out what all the pieces are first. And then once we understand that, and we continue to look for that and continue to break that down, because that's very complex in and of itself, then you have to take that and say, okay, I understand all these pieces, or I know about pieces. Let's start picking those pieces apart and figure out what causes them and what do they mean and what do they do and how does that affect things on a grander scale. So as you can see, it's pretty layered And it takes a lot of people. It's not a one-person thing, right? So it's not one single scientist that's just sitting there and is just doing all of it. It takes a lot of scientists studying a lot of different things from a lot of different angles, coming together and saying, I've got a piece, and I've got a piece, and I've got a piece, and we put all those pieces together to hopefully get a good, clear picture. So one of the reasons that that's super important for anybody that's interested in trying to understand neuroscience, it doesn't even mean that you have to be in the field of neuroscience, but support the research. We need people to support and give some help when it comes to not only monetarily, but just, encouraging kids to go into research, encouraging your states and your academic institutions and things like that to support the research. And it's super important. I mean, we're trying to save people's lives in a lot of cases. We're trying to help fix these problems that we know exist in the human body, and that's one thing that we're still learning a lot about. And so, we just need support publicly, is looking at this and understanding how complex it is. That really requires a lot of support from outside of the scientific community. Within the scientific community, we support each other, but it's outside the scientific community that we really need your support. So understanding these little differences and understanding that, like, one of the things that I study neurons and I study astrocytes, right? So that's something where I'm studying two different types of cells. There's other types of cells that I can look at, but for the most part, these are two major components, and I look at how these things interact, and I look at how certain proteins of interest, in our case, I'm looking at a specific protein called TDP43, which is transactive DNA response binding protein of 43 kilodaltons. It's a mouthful. It's basically just a protein that helps with transcription and translation from the nucleus of cells into the body of cells to make proteins. And I'll talk about that eventually in another series episode. If you guys are interested, let me know. If you want to know more about my research, I'd be more than happy to break some of that down, talk about it. But that kind of gives you an idea of, I could spend the rest of my life looking at just neurons and just astrocytes and this protein and how all this stuff works together and what it does and what other things are working with it. So it's very complex, and it's about how far you want to kind of go down those rabbit holes. And so some people study the same cell type or the same cell types and the same pieces of that for their entire career. That's how complex it is. But hopefully this helps a little bit to say, look, it's not as simple as just it's a neuron, or neuroscience is about neurons. Yes, it's about neurons, but there's a lot of different types of neurons. They do a lot of different things. They're all throughout your body. One example I like to give is that, like, in your kidneys, you have neurons, but they do different things. And one thing that it doesn't do, you don't have pain neurons, which are called nociceptors. So pain, the technical term for pain is nociception. So you don't have these nociceptors, these neurons that can sense pain. And so since that can't happen, when you have a kidney disease or kidney injury and somebody else say, my kidneys hurt, it's not the kidneys that are hurting. You're actually getting a sympathetic pain from the tissue around. So for instance, if your kidney is inflamed, it could inflame the tissue around it, and then that tissue would have neurons that are nociceptors that would be able to communicate pain, and you would say, I'm having a pain from my kidneys. So that's how really amazing the body is that even though that one particular organ doesn't have any pain receptors, there's other areas of your body that can actually help you to know that, like, something is not right, something is wrong. So that's where it's super interesting to understand how to differentiate between neurons and what they do and what they do not do, and then also understanding that they're not even by themselves in doing what they do. There's all these other types of cells that are in and around the nervous system that are helping to make it function, and really, without these other types of cells, the nervous system just doesn't function properly. So I really appreciate you guys coming. I appreciate all the support, and help me out so that I can do more of these and give you guys more. Let me know what you want to know about. Send me a message on Twitter, send me a tweet. You can message me directly either there or through YouTube. You can feel free to leave a comment below. Share the video if you like it. If you're interested in doing a video with me, let me know. I'd love to have some other neuroscientists that want to do a Friday Night Neuro session, and hopefully what we can get to is just a regular session, and we can pick through some topics and really kind of simplify some things and make it digestible. I mean, I think it's just a lot, and I mean, it helps me as much as anybody, because obviously I want to be able to understand my own area of expertise better, and the way to do that is to be able to teach other people and to make it simple. And if I can make it simple for you, then I have to understand it pretty well. So again, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it, and definitely hit the button to subscribe, put the bell on so you know when we post a new video. Leave a comment below and share with other people so that they can come and participate as well. Thank you so much for all your support, and as always, I'll see you next time. Tight.